Hi everyone, welcome to a step-by-step tutorial on how to work with lists in Python programming language. And remember, this is a comprehensive video tutorial including lots of topics such as list creation, indexing in list, slicing, and also working with methods and functions in a list, and also nested lists and such other topics that we are going to cover in this video. So please stay tuned. So first of all, let's talk about list creation. For example, here we want to define a list called x. So we type x equals to, and in order to create a list, we should open a square bracket. You can see that we are opening a square bracket, and also we should close a square bracket. And within these brackets, we should put all the values that we want separated by comma. For example, maybe you want to create a list of numbers, for example, a list of 4 numbers. So we pass, for example, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean 4 numbers. So if I print the x variable and also print the type of x variable, and if I run the code, you can see that here's our list, and you can see the type of this variable, I mean x variable, is a list. So we can verify that we have defined a variable called x, which is a list. So let's take another example, and here we want to define a variable called y, which is again a list, and we want to pass different data types to a list called y. So this is a key concept, that you can pass different data types to a list. So for example, here I want to pass an integer, let's say 2, and I want to pass a float number, let's say like 3.14, a complex number like 3 plus 5j, a string, for example, let's say like kulak, which is the name of our channel. It's a string, and also we can pass boolean like, let's say, true, and such other data types that we are going to talk about them later. But here we can see that we are passing different data types to a list, and this is a key concept, that we can pass different data types to a list. And here, if I print the y variable, and also if I print the type of y variable, and if I run the code, you can see that here's our list, and you can see here that the type of our variable, I mean y variable, is a list. So also we can verify that we have created another list which includes different data types. Another important topic that we should discuss about is element-wise operations in Python lists. And you should notice that element-wise operations are not supported by lists. For example, here we have defined 2 variables, which are 2 lists, a list called x, which include 3 numbers, 1, 2, 3, and also we have defined another variable which is called y, and again, which includes 3 numbers in it, 2, 2, 2. And maybe we want to add each element in x with the corresponding value in y. I mean, we want to add, for example, 1 to 2, 2 to 2, and also 3 to 2. I mean, we want to add each element in the x with the corresponding value in y. So in order to do so, you cannot type such a thing like this. You cannot type x plus y. Why? Because this plus sign, I mean this addition operator, does not do element-wise addition in lists. Remember that element-wise operations are not supported by lists. This plus sign, I mean this addition operator, plays the concatenation role. I mean, we are concatenating x and y with this plus sign. This plus sign, I mean this addition operator, plays the concatenation role in lists. It doesn't do element-wise addition. So if I run the code, you can see that we have concatenated x to y. So this is the x, I mean this is our x list, and this is our y list, that we have concatenated these two to each other. Okay, let's take another example. For example, here we have defined a variable called x, which is a list including 3 numbers, 1, 2, 3. And for example, here, if I type print x times 3, this is not going to multiply each value in x by 3. This is not going to do that. Why? Because as I said, element-wise operations are not supported by lists. So here, when I type print x times 3, it is going to repeat x, I mean the list, 3 times. So if I run the code, you can see that it has repeated the x variable, I mean the list, 3 times. This is the first time, this is the second time, and this is the third time that it has been repeated. So maybe you ask, how can we do element-wise operations in Python programming language? Although this is not a question that we can answer now, but in future videos, I mean in this course, we are going to cover a topic called NumPy arrays. That data structure, I mean NumPy arrays do support element-wise operations in Python programming language. But remember that lists do not support element-wise operations. So let's talk about nested lists. What do I mean by nested lists? It means that we are defining another list inside another list. So we are defining a list inside another list. This is called nested lists. So for example, here, we want to define a variable which is called x, and this is a list, and we want to pass, let's say, a, b, and c. And here, we want to pass another element, which is a list. For example, a list containing two elements, let's say Google and let's say YouTube. So we can see that we have passed a list to another list. This is called nested lists. So here, if I print the x variable, and also if I print the type of x variable, we can see that if I run the code, we can see that this is our x variable, and the type of our x variable is again a list. But remember, this is a nested list. Why? Because we have passed a list inside another list. So this is called nested lists. But maybe you ask, can we define another list? For example, inside this list, of course we can. For example, here we want to create another list. We want to define another list, for example, including three numbers, 1, 2, 3. So we can see that we have defined a list inside another list. So this is again nested list. So the concept of nested lists means that we want to define list inside list. This is called nested lists. So let's talk about indexing in Python lists. For example, here we have defined a variable which is a list including A, B, C, D, E, F. And let's ask a couple of questions. What is the first value? Of course, yes, it's A. What is the second value? It's B. What is the third value? It is C. You and I say, okay, the value at location 1 is A. The value at location 2 is B. But Python does not start counting at 1. Python starts counting at 0. For example, Python says that the value at location 0 is A. Remember, Python starts counting at 0. So Python says the value at location 0 is A. The value at location 1 is B. The value at location 2 is C, and etc. And the value at location 5 is F. So remember, Python starts counting at 0. There it is. So if I want to print, let's say, this value, I mean the value at location 2, I should print such a thing like this. For example, I should print X, and because we want to print this one, I mean D, you can see that this one is at the location 3. I mean, Pythonically speaking, I mean counting at 0, you can see that this D is at location 3. So we should print X3. And if I run the code, you can see that here it is. We have printed this value. And maybe we want to print this value. You can see that this value is at location 5. So here I print X5. So if I run the code, you can see that we have printed F, which is at location 5. Another example, maybe you want to print this B, which you can see that it is at location 1. So here we simply type X1 because we want this value which is at location 1. So if I run the code, you can see that here it is. Okay, let's talk about negative indices in Python. And remember, Python does have negative indices. Maybe you ask, how can we interpret negative indices? For example, we know that Python starts counting at index 0, but how can we interpret negative indices? So we know that Python starts at 0. Python starts counting at 0. So we don't have such a previous value. So in order to interpret negative values, we should go to the end, and we call the last element -1. I mean, the location of the last element is called -1. The second last is called -2. The third last is called -3, and etc. So here and in this way, we can define negative indices in Python. And here we can see that we have negative indices. For example, this F is at location 5 and also -1. This E is at location 4 and also -2. This D is at location 3 and also -3. And this C is at location 2 and also -4. This B is at location 1 and also -5, and this A is at location 0 and also -6. So for example, if I want to print B, I can do it in two ways. For example, I can print X, let's say 1. Why? Because B is at location 1. So if I run the code, you can see that here is B. And also, because B is also at location -5, we can print X -5. So if I run the code, you can see that here is B. So remember that we have negative indices as well as positive indices in Python programming language. So let's talk about the slicing. What do I mean by slicing? For example, here we want to print these three values. I mean A, B, C. I mean we want a slice of this list. So we want to print A, B, C. And remember, A is at location, or let's say index 0, B is at index 1, and C is at index 2. So we want the values at index 0 all the way up to 2. So we print X, and we want the values at indices 0 all the way up to, this colon means all the way up to. So we want the values at index 0 all the way up to 3. But remember, we shouldn't write 2. Why? Because this second value, this 3, is exclusive. So if we want the values at index 0 all the way up to 2, we should write 3. Why? Because here we are saying we want the values at index 0 all the way up to 3, but not including 3. So if we want the values at index 0 all the way up to 2, we should write 3. Why? Because this second value is exclusive. So again, if I want the values at index 0 all the way up to 2, we should write the values at index 0 all the way up to 3. Why? Because here we are saying the values at index 0, the values at index 0 all the way up to 3, but not including 3. So there it is. So if I run the code, you can see here's our A, B, C. The things that we have wanted to see. So let's take another example. Suppose that we want to print these values, D, E, F. And you can see that the index of D is 3, the index of E is 4, and also the index of F is 5. So if you want to print these values, D, E, F, we should print the values at index 3 all the way up to 5. So here we print X, and we want the values at index 3 all the way up to 5. So I should type 6. Why? Because this second value, this 6 is exclusive. So I should type 6 instead of 5. Why? Because this one, this second value is exclusive. So here we are saying we want the values at index 3 all the way up to 6, but not including 6. And also remember that we can leave off this element in this example. Why? Because if we leave off this element, it means that we want the values at index 3 all the way up to the end of the list. So if we leave off the second value, we mean we want the values at index 3 all the way up to the end of the list. So if we run the code, you can see that here is the result, D, E, F. So let's take another example. Suppose that we want to print these values, A, B, C. And remember, the index of A is 0, the index of B is 1, and the index of C is 2. If we want to print these values, A, B, C, we want to print the values at index 0 all the way up to 2. So here we should type print X, and we want the values at index 0 all the way up to 2, but we should write 3. Why? Because the second value, this 3, is exclusive. So we should type we want the values at index 0 all the way up to 3, but not including 3. So if I run the code, you can see that here is the result. And remember, we have another way for this example. If we want the values at index 0 all the way up to 2, we can leave off this element, and it means that we want the values at the beginning of the list all the way up to 3, but not including 3. So here we are saying that we want the elements at the beginning of the list all the way up to 3, but not including 3. So if I run the code, you can see that here is the results. I mean A, B, C. So let's talk about a couple of methods and other stuff that we need to know about lists. The first method is append, which is used for appending a value at the end of a list. So here, for example, we want to append D, let's say, at the end of this list. In order to do this, we simply type x.append. I mean, we want to append a value at the end of this list, and I pass in D. So after appending D to this X list, we can print the X variable. And if I run the code, you can see that this D has been added to our list. But maybe we want to add multiple values simultaneously. So for example, suppose that we want to add D and E to this list simultaneously. In order to do this, we simply type x.extend, not append, x.extend, and we pass the values that we want in a list. So for example, here we want to add D and also E. So remember that we are passing a list containing the values that we want to extend to this list. And here, after extending these values, if I print the X variable, and if I run the code, you can see that here it is. And you can see D and E have been added to this list, I mean the X variable. But maybe you ask, how can we insert a value at a certain index in a list? For example, maybe you want to add a value, or maybe you want to insert a value at index 0, I mean the beginning of the list. In order to do this, we simply type x.insert. I mean, we want to insert a value. And remember, this insert method takes 2 arguments. The first argument is the index that we want to put the values in. So for example, we want to put our values in the index 0, I mean in the beginning of the list. So we simply type 0. And we want to pass, and the other argument is the value that we want to put in. So for example, maybe we want to insert, let's say, kulak, which is the name of our channel, at index 0. So after inserting kulak at the beginning of the list, I mean at index 0, we can print the X variable. And if I run the code, you can see that kulak has been added at index 0. So now let's talk about how to remove a value from a list. For example, here we want to remove this B from this list. In order to do so, we simply type x.remove because you want to remove a value, and that value is B. So after removing B, if I print the X variable, which is our list, and if I run the code, you can see that the B value, I mean this B, has been removed from our list. So maybe we want to remove an element by its index and not its value. For example, here, if we want to remove this B by its index and not its value, we should use another method called pop. So here we simply type x.pop, and we should pass in the index of this B, or whatever we want. I mean, whatever element that we want to remove. So here we want to remove this B, and the index of this B is 1. Why? Because the index of A is 0 and the index of B is 1. So we want to pop out the value at index 1. So we simply type x.pop, and we want to remove the value at index 1. So if I delete this line and if I run the code, you can see that B, I mean the value at index 1, has been popped out, I mean has been removed from our list. And remember, if we don't pass any value to the pop method, I mean if we delete this one and we don't pass any value to the pop method, by default, it removes the last element in the list. So here, if I run the code, you can see that C, I mean the last element in the list, has been popped out, has been removed from our list. Okay, let's talk about the reverse method, which is used to reverse a list. For example, here we have defined a variable called X, which is a list including A, B, C. And if we want to reverse this list, we can simply type x.reverse, and after reversing the X list, we can print the X variable. And if I run the code, you can see that our list has been reversed. So let's talk about the sort method, which is a method used for sorting the values of a list in ascending order. So here, if I want to sort the values of this list in ascending order, we simply type x.sort, and after sorting the values in ascending order, I want to print the x variable. So if I run the code, you can see that the values in this x list has been sorted in ascending order. So maybe you ask, how can we sort the values in this list in descending order? In order to do so, we have two options. The first option is to reverse the list after sorting. So here, after sorting the values in ascending order, if I type x.reverse, and why? Because after sorting the values in ascending order, if we reverse the values, then we will get the values in descending order. So if I print the x variable, and if I run the code, you can see that all the values has been sorted in descending order. The second option is to pass another argument called reverse to this sort method. So if I simply type reverse equals to true, I mean that we want to reverse the sorted list. So if I reverse the sorted list, we will get all the values in descending order. So here, if I print the x variable, and if I run the code, you can see that our values in this list has been sorted in descending order. Thank you for watching. Please remember that we are going to continue this series on Python tutorials. So don't forget to subscribe and click the bell next to it to be notified of every new video. Thank you for watching.